been with Intelligence for 18 years and working in the SAP ecosystem for 22 years. Prior to working as an industry solution principal, he has held intelligent positions of Director of Mid-Market Solutions, Project Manager, Manager of IT, or of Industry Solution Development, and Application Management Support Manager. He's part of the NTT Global One team and has application industry experience in manufacturing, consumer products, automotive, professional services, and life sciences. He has a Bachelor of Science degree from Miami University in Ohio, and concentration in marketing and statistics, and an MBA from the University of Cincinnati with dual specialization in finance and management. Hobbies include running, biking, golf, and playing saxophone, so maybe you'll see him out tonight in one of the bars.
Yeah, there you go. Boy, that's a high bar to get to, right? Okay. All right, real great. Well, hey, thanks everybody. Really appreciate your time this afternoon, and Mike for the kind introduction. I really look forward to this conversation. As I was telling my colleagues, I was really excited about being able to present here at the Chemical Conference and certainly share this time with Dr. Perry here. So Starbase and I were preparing for the presentation today, and we thought, this is great. We have the high privilege and distinct honor of being between you and lunch, right? So what were we going to do to make this entertaining, fun, and the thoughts of like providing 850 slides of a presentation would be one thing, but we actually...
856.
856, darn it, you added some at the very end, right? So yeah, but ultimately what we decided on was really getting into making and having some props here and giving away things. So that's what we've decided to do. And if you haven't gotten an opportunity or you didn't get scanned coming into the room, Shawnee, wave your hand. She can take down your name really fast, and we're going to raffle off a Yeti cooler at the end of this presentation and even do some things before that. So how does that sound? Okay, that's good. You're starting to warm up. We're getting there. So we're going to try a little harder here. So let's start to get things kicked off. This is our agenda here, so we'll try to get through. We're running a little bit behind, but we'll try to catch up here. Really want to talk about what is going on out in industry, right? What is this mad world that we're living in? Mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures. You've heard about it all conference long in a variety of presentations, I'm sure. We'll try to incorporate some of those specific points. What do we need to do to prepare for the digital reality? And then really getting into what Monument Chemical has done to realize that. And that's been a collaboration with ourselves at Intelligence, also with SAP. We really think that we've got a great story there and insights that would be helpful and pressing and important for you to listen to, okay? So before we get started, I like to play a game called Notable Quotable, okay? So it's kind of a fun game and where we're going to go out there and we're going to get an idea. I'm going to throw a quote up there and you're going to guess who it is, okay? So it's audience participation. You thought you were coming in here and you're just going to sit here and just listen to us. But no, we're going to have you participate. So sweat equity is the most valuable equity there is. Know your business and industry better than anyone else in the world. Love what you do or don't do it. Who said that? Any guesses? Sorry? Way back in the back.
I was going to say Bezos.
Jeff Bezos. It's good answer, but it's not the right one, but I have to give you credit for being the first one. So you actually get a prize. Now let's see how many people actually get to start asking and answering questions now. So there you go, sir, very much.
Steve Jobs.
Okay. Keith, who? Steve Jobs? No. Jack Welch? No.
Warren Buffett.
Warren Buffett? No. Okay, so I'm going to give you a hint, okay? And this picture is not Austin. I'm sure of it. Okay?
Mark Cuban.
Wow, very good. So it's from Shark Tank. That's right, exactly. Very, very good. So excellent guess. It is Mark Cuban. So I tried to get a reference from Texas and being a surrogate Texan myself growing up in Houston, thought that would be a relevant one. But you know, when you really think about that, knowing your business and industry better than anyone else in the world, that really resonated with me. I mean, we're all here trying to learn more about the industry, learn about where it's going, how it's going to happen. And when you look at that, you really need to take a look at what's happening culturally, and then really what is the impact of that relevant to what we're doing in the world, and specifically in mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures. And when you look at it, we've had a profound impact. There's a profound impact or change that has happened on culture. And the result of that is businesses must do that too. Just take a look at these 3 examples here. The workforce of one, virtual silos, diversity of backgrounds, and individual requirements to act. There is an inherent will and desire for people to learn and be able to find and research answers. Many times I go out to a restaurant with my parents or my sister, and we start getting into a conversation, and all of a sudden the topic comes up that we don't know about. What happens? We pull out our phone. We get the answer right then and there, right? Virtual learning and a desire to really getting interested in a lot of other different topics. Fascinating, right? Extreme sociability. I think about the presentation. Everybody go to Richard Picciotto's, I hope I got close on his last name, his presentation last evening. Pretty remarkable, right? What did you think about when you saw those pictures? What did you think about? A lot of people probably think about, gosh, the starkness of that day, the significance and the change of what happened on that day. But one thing that's very interesting about it that's different, and something that I think a lot of people don't realize, is that the first cell phone camera was invented in 2000. It was not really sold in phones until 2002. So all the pictures that you see there are just from cameras, and there's not, very rare, if any, pictures are really captured from a cell phone. Imagine where we've come. The iPhone wasn't invented until 2007, right? Or really sold en masse until then. So we've had an extreme change from a cultural perspective on that. Just thinking about back then, what would it be like if we had that technology back in 2001 versus what we have now? So there's tremendous impact there, lots of impacts on the social side of things, promoting events, going and getting an understanding of what that is, tweeting things out, taking pictures, and being able to plow that into innovative cycles. And then certainly thinking big with the to-go concept. Higher expectations, autonomous world, instant gratification. And when you think about those ideas, that really becomes a catalyst for what's going on in the business world, and specifically in the world of mergers and acquisitions. And when you, I'm just going to put up some studies here, and we've heard a lot about it in the conference here. This is what's going on out in the industry right now. And you've seen a tremendous rise all the way up to 2016, where we've had a tremendous amount of mergers, both volume and value. We talked about the Big Five yesterday and all those specific deals. We've had a little bit of a tailing off in 2017. There were a couple deals out there that were large that didn't actually go through, but nonetheless, still a significant part of the industry and a significant part of what is going on out there. And then when you look at it and you bring that back home into a specific subsegment of that being private equity, we see that there's a pretty good trend of private equity involvement in the actual mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures. That's really what Starbase is here to talk about, a little bit about how does that play into that role and that cultural impact. And when you get into those things, you really have to get into some thinkings about trends and requirements that are out there. What is it that happens in a merger, acquisition, and divestiture type environment? You need to be focusing on what those core requirements are. What is the company synergies that you're going to have? There are some things that happen as a result of an acquisition and a merger that are very, very good, and there will be very good synergistic effects. Other things, not so much. How do you handle those specific requirements, and what strategy do you employ to be able to handle those short, mid, and long term? How do you find out what are the points of integration and points of removal? And there could be regulatory compliance requirements that are going to be forcing those removals, like the divestitures, or there's going to be some things that, that doesn't really meet the transformative vision of what needs to be going forward for this company. I think that you saw a keynote this morning from Legos, and they were talking about Kodak's, Blockbuster, and all those companies out there that did not meet with a lot of success, right? Well, that's very important when you're looking at mergers and acquisitions, right? What is it that the product line or the core competency you have that you want to continue on with? What is it that you might need to shed as a result of that to either change or adapt or adopt a new part of that core competence, okay? So you've got to be thinking about that, and then certainly the requirements are really around a digital platform. How do you be able to do that, and how can you handle the flexibility and the capability of doing that? And the bottom line that I will impress upon all of you is that there's a lot of significant opportunity there for growth and improvement, and continuous improvement at that. And that's really what I have been talking about with Starbase for quite some time, and he threw out the term that I just absolutely love when we were in the conversations at the very beginning, and that is the notion of it being a journey. It's really, when you get finished with something, it's not really the end, it's the end of the beginning. And that's really, really what's important. So, when you look at when you're getting ready for that digital reality, and we'll examine how we got ready for that digital reality in the mad world that we're living in here, specifically with Starbase, I just want to throw out a notion of how you prepare for that. A lot of people say AI stands for artificial intelligence, right? So there's another study that was out there. They said, well, maybe it's not artificial intelligence, it's augmented intelligence. And I like that term, augmented intelligence, because we're really not replacing fully the knowledge capital with machines and those sorts of things. We're supplementing them. And I think that that's really an important concept. When you look at supplementing something, you're not taking away all of those innovations, the intuitions, the knowledge, the experience, all that sort of stuff. You can't replace that fully, but you can certainly supplement it. And you can supplement it to create and make new decisions from that, right? And if I go forwards instead of backwards, that would be good. And it really starts with the S/4HANA Core. We're going to spend a little bit of time and talk about that, right? And how SAP has developed and had that as the beginnings of a digital platform. That gets augmented and optimized with various different solutions around that. The Arebas, the success factors, the business analytics, the digital boardroom, all these sorts of topics that can certainly get into and be able to handle the realities of big data, right? There's a statistic out there that I really love is in the last 2 years, 90% of the world's data has been generated. 90% in the last 2 years. Just astonishing, right? Well, how do you consume all that data? There's got to be a way to do it, right? When we've only been consuming between 5 and 15% of the data and analyzing that amount of data, we're going to have to do more of that, right? And then that really gets into the final level of augmented intelligence. And really, it addresses what I call the RICE conversation, right? Increasing revenue, lowering cost, improving the user experience, and finally, increasing the opportunity for innovation, right? So that's really what we're getting to. And when you look at it from a mergers, acquisitions, divestiture, that's really what we need to be thinking about and talking about. And that goes back to Starbase's point that he mentioned to me at the very beginning in our conversation about it being a journey, okay? Make sense, everybody? Okay? So I'm going to turn it over to Starbase now, and we're going to have just a little bit of a dialogue. Let him share his experiences on what we've done, what we've also worked with SAP on, and how we've navigated that journey. Okay, so Starbase, go ahead.
Thank you, Brian. And before I give a couple of introductions about Monument, I'll pick up on what Brian said about what I said about the journey. The journey requires a destination goal and some infrastructure. I need a road or a rail or something that is going to enable me to take the path. And second, it requires a balanced, I would say, wheels. I can't just go just with a set of left wheels, if I call them entrepreneurship. And say, I want to in the previous presentation, the speaker said, test tube is where you bring the innovation. But you can't scale that into a large, 30-meter long distillation columns. You need both. So you just can't go with left wheels on your journey. You need the right wheels on. Standardize where you can, be purposeful, and enable that so that there is a balance. So with that, I come from Monument Chemical. Actually this Monday, we had a great pizza party in the lunchroom. We celebrated our 10th anniversary. We're a relatively new company with very mature chemistries, technologies, asset kits. How do we get there? We didn't start with the test tube. We started through acquisitions. We brought very robust, technologies, chemicals, and competencies. We operate in ship channel. We operate in Kentucky, in Europe, in polyols, solvents, and a significant presence in custom manufacturing. So that's who we are. Again, we're at the beginning stages of that journey. So in the MAD, A is a pretty important factor for us. Coming to the key points for consideration, I'll get into that, but Mike introduced me 20 plus years in chemicals. I want to share something that's relevant to SAP and this group. For a large part, I worked for a chemical company called ICI. And ICI is one of the beta companies when SAP was at its beginning stages of bringing the enterprise resource planning thought process and architecture. So I do come from, a relatively new company now, but very established and user of SAP and its journey. So, in a sense, this is a very useful, point in time for us, to share and where we are. I already went through. We have 4 locations in the major chemical manufacturing sites, and Monument is a part of a larger privately held, family-owned, 4th generation management company called Heritage Group that has presence in environmental, refining, construction, and several other areas. Chemicals is Monument, for Heritage. When we started and then continue to evolve, the vision is very simple. Be responsive to customers' needs and deploy the technologies in the most effective way and leverage people and the capabilities. And basically do it safe, do it right, be fair, and solve the problems. Rest will be taken care of. And then it's any problem is welcome. We're not afraid to fail. Test it, try it, scale it up, all relatively quickly and fast. And that's the entrepreneurial set of left wheels. But as the critical mass and the growth is taking shape, there are places where we want to be consistent. There are places where we want to be standardizing, not for the sake of standardizing because I read in the brochure that it's great, but it does create a customer value. Ultimately, that's what is the key part. And in that part of the journey, I came to Monument 3.5 years ago and started looking at and say, in the A of the MAD, a lot of good comes, a lot of opportunities come. When we took a look at, where are we with our systems, our practices, and our planning processes, we did recognize that we have a very disparate set of legacy tools that came. And the priority was not to change all of them on day one, but be consistent to the customer's need, but then at the back end, be clear about, how do we elevate the game and standardize it and make it more efficient. So, that's the beginnings of the systems journey for us. Where do we standardize? What's the thoughtful process? So, preparing for that journey was taking an inventory, right? What do we have, and what is it doing, and what is it not doing? Even if it's doing what we want, is it the best way to conduct the business today and be prepared for tomorrow? And then basically, we took very textbook example. We approached, folks at iTelligence. Brian has been an integral part of that journey in the initial stages on making us look at in an objective way, not a forceful way, not a sales pitch. It's just saying, here's how you could take an inventory of what you have and what you want. And basically, we took a look at technical infrastructure, business processes, again, left wheel, right wheel. I keep coming back. We're very successful, but we want to be like that, in the long run. So we took advice and counsel from iTelligence in looking at the entire range of whether it's order to cash or procure to pay or manufacturing logistics or accounting and finance, and then underlying our innovation and the safety. So the whole 360. And what do we do today? And then we brought a lot of folks from all the businesses. I'm sure you hear this all the time. Every one of my team leads coming into these sessions said, oh no, Kentucky's business is completely different from, it's day and night. Our processes are different, our customer needs are different. I said, okay. But when we came, there was an internal benchmarking goal before even we go to best practices. What is common among us and what is not? And among them, what's best practice internally and what is not? So that was our internal landscape. And then juxtapose that with what's the people that have already treaded this journey, traveled through this journey, learned, and what can we actually use rather than reinventing, the whole wheel. That's when, Brian and team came, said these are the sets of best practices that you could employ. And we were, again, left wheel, right wheel. We wanted to make sure that, we got a triangulation approach. So we went to SAP and said, look, you have been in this space for decades with the whole world running on SAP. What did you learn? Not from a sales pitch, but conceptually and a learning point of view. That's when we actually had the good fortune of tying up with Mike's team. The value engineering. I wanted to see, there's a set of business needs, there's a set of business proposals to architect and everything else. But then when I implement all of that, what am I getting, both from customer responsiveness, ROI, not the hard numbers in terms of 21% on what you invested in, things like that. It's important, but soft, benefits and everything else. So Mike and his team really took a completely a bubbled approach. They weren't engaged in the selling aspects of the licenses. I could say that Mike didn't coach me to say this, but it wasn't a sales. There was a invisible firewall. They basically took away our needs, and then they conducted 3 weeks of workshops, and basically extracted from our teams disparate groups coming from Europe or different businesses and said, what do you do, and can you actually use what we already have as out of the box? So that kind of triggered in my mind as an executive sponsor for the company saying, that is the question I'm going to ask every time. Anytime they said, I want a purple dot on my invoice, can you live with what the standard functionality gave? Unless it's truly value creating and differentiating, what is the best practice out-of-the-box functionality is going to give us? I'm coming again from an experience in mid-90s. We went through an implementation, first implementation. I think it took R3, or I forget the version numbers, but it took three years for us to really go to war room and design, and then interviews and flowcharts, and Visio was there or not, I don't remember, but at the end of the day, at like 9 months of war room, they came with, hey, here is how the solution would look like. And all said and done, it took 3 years to implement. And then SAP came and said, hey, you need to change the version, from whatever. I said, okay, Excel, I know, 3.0 to 3.1, I'll play. Oh, I said, no. You need to go back and make sure that whatever customization you did, we got to do all that. We thought, we didn't do much customization. Actually, the cost of redoing the customization was n times bigger than just the licensing and consulting costs. That's when believe me, I was young at one point. At that time, I said, I'm never going to go into, I'll try to avoid as much as possible that trap of Z programs. And they're needed. It's not a criticism of that. How do you minimize that? So the question every time we ask is, what is so different that we cannot use the out-of-box functionality. So that was the guiding principle. I want to make sure, I get the point across. But and then reviewing and aligning the business processes to best practices. The more we look at the best practice solutions, the amount of thinking that went in, the amount of rigor and globality, whether it's selling a pound that's made in Kentucky and selling it in Netherlands, the process and the tracking and all the details that are worked into the system, I wouldn't want to reinvent it. Take it as much and then customize around it. So that was the alignment into best practices. So that was our journey. It's not done. I think we are at exit 2. We are going in through go live and some of those typical points in journey, but triangulation between solution providers or implementation partners and centers of excellence within SAP, and truly understanding business owners, what the needs are, has been quite a good start of our journey.
Awesome. Yep.
Whoops.
So one of the things, and I will be brief on this specific slide here, but one of the things that we certainly used along with Mike and the team was really anchoring to the whole best practices notion. And one of the things that I think is very, very important when you consider about dialogues and when you're looking at a world of mergers and acquisitions and divestitures, the best practices certainly provides a good foundation of that. One thing that I would emphasize to you to think about is, number one, when you're going and reviewing those business processes and the dialogue that we have, there's an opportunity for both of us to learn. I learned a lot from Sarvase, I think, and I hope that Sarvase learned a lot from us. And we really got into a collaborative conversation on how we could make that work. But the other point that was also important is we also wanted to make sure that we had an objectivity with applying a maximum amount of foresight. Sarvase knew that there were acquisitions that were going to be in play. We also knew that there were acquisitions that were going to be potentially in play in the future. Mm-hmm. It's just normal for that to happen when you see the big guys, the big 5 acquisitions to happen, for those sorts of things to cascade downstream, right? And as a result of that, we wanted to make sure that we had that capability to be able to handle those specific conversations. And we went through that with that idea because, again, have to have a digital platform. You have to be able to realize those synergies and make sure that we have the capability to rapidly get them in place, because that's where the value and the return on investment needs to come from.
In some of the due diligence conversations, the question comes, should we bring a third party to transition our systems to your systems? And I can very confidently say these days when I say, we have the blueprint, we have the skeleton ready. We don't need. So basically, we did keep the potentials of all the acquisitions and the rigor that'll bring in our thought process when we designed the blueprint. So at any given time, we have a shell, and the information goes in and minimal, touch points and.
Yep. Okay. So we'll I know that we're running a little bit short on time here. So so the implementation approach that we had, we certainly were talking about going through the S/4HANA application stack. That's step 1, if you will, with realization of what ultimately we need to do in the augmented intelligence world. We have gone and deployed the SAP S/4HANA version 1709. We're using the full set and suite of SAP best practices and industry practices for chemicals on that. We wanted to make sure, as we were talking about the rollout, right, is to make sure that we have the capability that now that we have the foundation in, how do we move forward with that? And then, oh, by the way, if an acquisition comes in between your actual implementation, you're able to have that conversation to figure out how to incorporate and navigate in that in there, right? So, yep. Okay. Come on.
This is basically, I touched on a couple of points, minimize the technical development, maintain focus on the flexibility. It's not losing sight of, how do you, play between establishing and losing sight. It's easy said than done from top down. I can say very esoterically to the team, hey, do the right thing, but at the same time, we want to make sure it is, at the end of the day, the whole rollout is adding value and servicing the customer's need without actually adding more costs or complexities to the business. Don't be afraid of, afraid to fail. Just fail fast. The whole process of testing. I'm sure all of you went through rollouts and implementations, so I'm not preaching the concepts, but I have a metric during the integration tests and user tests that says first pass rate. If a user during the test raised the hand even slightly saying, am I doing this right? Even if all steps were done right, I say that's a fail on the test. So that it's okay to have that first pass rate as 0% during the integration test, rather than having something better than, similar to that after go live. So basically, we want to be as rigorous. Don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to raise the hand. Fail, but fail fast during the initial phases, so that it doesn't become an impediment, for the business come the go live times or come the execution of all these decisions. So that's, these are cautious, elements. We're not done with the journey by any stretch of imagination, but been a pretty good spot in this particular journey with all these cautious elements.
Very good. So I think that we summarized a lot of these points, certainly, and you've seen this diagram probably before. It's a little bit of a different representation from what we've shown and talked about here, but certainly leverage best practices as a foundation, and then certainly use the technology as an enabler to and for the overall business journey. Keep in mind the notion of augmented intelligence. Keep in mind that the world that we live in is going to be fast. I remember being at a conference and having a person from SAP say, you're on a rocket ship and today is going to be the slowest day of the rest of your lives. So, that's very, very important. I think that I feel that, and I think that we all can relate to that, right, as a team. So, one more slide, I think. And that's really it. So I hope that you found this conversation helpful, insightful. Certainly from Starbase's perspective, we'll do the raffle here. If we bring up the Yeti cooler up front, we'll go ahead and do that. While we get ready for that, any questions that I could answer, or for Starbase and I to answer, either him or I. Yes.
Could you go back to your Solution Explorer slide?
Yes. So, yep, you got it. Okay.
We're coming off of a recent acquisition. And when I look at this, I don't see anything specifically called out for EHS, regulatory, anything like that. So, sorry, when you talk about your due diligence process and having your skeleton or your roadmap, your blueprint, and you're following that, what considerations are you taking into account with regards to regulatory aspects that could make or break your acquisition success?
Independent of the systems itself, right? It's basically the practices and the data, the safety practices and the data from a historic perspective. Second is compliance. Overall, there are regulatory compliance issues, there are safety compliance issues, and there is another piece, coming from supply chain background, there's this whole slew of, do not do business with, do not ship to, parties, screening, not just the direct customers, but the customers are customers. There are restrictions, there are sanctioned countries, sanctioned individuals and customers. You cannot depend on Susie's experience in the customer service, because she has been there in that role for 30 years. She knows everything. But if that's the answer I got, then I want to, there's nothing wrong with it, but going forward, I want to have a system or a third party or objective way to interface that. And SAP has given, you know, those interfaces that are live, dynamic, and the ability to screen. So there are, I think I gave you like a composite of 3 areas. It's the historic, you know, to gain an understanding of the data, the compliance and training, and then the whole host of, you know, external regulatory environment. So all these 3 are, you know, very critical. The penalties are not that significant on an item basis, but they get levied on an item basis. So if you shipped for 10 years, every item gets, you know, penalized by like $1,000. It could be, you know, pretty daunting, not just for the economy, but the brand and everything else.
So building on one discussion, is that built into the sales and marketing track, or is that built into the supply chain management track? Where is that due diligence built in, or in your experience?
In our experience, it is actually in the operational arena, but you know, I could call that in the supply chain, but not as much in the sales and marketing. It's the execution part of it.
Okay. Well, again, thanks for your time. So one last story. Mike told you that I play saxophone. My sister is actually a high school band director, so I need one more last part of audience participation. So Sarves, I don't know if you threw your name in here, but I'll let you draw out of it.
All
but
of
everybody,
them are my name,
could you like make my sister proud and do a little drum roll on the table there? Okay, yeah, please, a little louder, Go ahead. Go ahead. Okay.
Should I read it?
Yes, read it away.
Let me see. Brian Everett.
All right. Thank you. All right. No.
Jim Appadisano.
All right. Very good. All right. Well, great. Well, hey, everybody. Thanks. Sorry, what was that? There you go. Well, we'll worry about getting that sent to you. Okay. So everybody, thanks so very much for your time. Thanks for your attendance here. I'll let you go ahead and go to lunch. Really appreciate the dialogue. We have our contact numbers at the contact details at the end of the presentation, which you'll be getting as part of the conference. So I'm happy to engage or interact with any of you if you have any further discussions you'd like to have. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.